Greetings of the day. I'm Dev Shah, a first year BCom LLB student at the Institute of Law, Nirma University.
I am Gunjan Kothari, also a first year BCom LLB student at Institute of Law, Nirma University.
So, over the last two episodes, we've spoken about domestic violence and gender based violence, but not in the way these topics are usually discussed. We didn't begin with laws, we didn't begin with statistics, we begin with three stories. And in every case, we saw that violence happened inside a home. The harm came from someone familiar or someone who is either a relative or either his spouse or someone. And the warning signs were visible long before the violence reached its breaking point. And these stories, in a quiet way, conveyed us one uncomfortable truth. That is, violence is rarely sudden. It builds. It quietly builds slowly and often in full view of everyone around it. So basically, this stories conveyed us that violence is something that grow over the period of time, and we need to see it before it goes too far away, right? And honestly, what distributed us the most wasn't just the violence itself; it was how normal it felt.
True, very true. I felt the same way. What stayed with me wasn't the absence of law, but the absence of urgency. Like, I don't get it why people don't think it is not urgent to address this issue. This has been something which has been going on around for decades, and still they don't feel the urgency to address this. So, in episode 1, we spoke about myths that reduce violence to physical harm, myths that blame survivors for staying, myths that pretend violence exists only in certain homes or certain classes, and we also uh, showed the reality against those myths. In episode 2, we went deeper and we asked why violence actually happens, why reporting feels unsafe, and why the law so often reaches too late. Today's episode is different. Today is not about explaining the problem. It is about asking a even harder question, which is what now? What now about this, Dave? What now?
So adding one point to your side is that I feel we also talked about one of the most important question, that is gender only, is violence only happens to women. We also talked
Yeah.
about violence does not only happens to women, it also happens with men. So the stereotypical thought that people have that men are the only preparators and women are the victims. That is not
True.
true. So asking about a harder question, what now? So if we had to sum up everything we've discussed so far in one line, it would be this: that India does not lack law at all. India lacks how these laws are experienced by real people. So we need to make sure that the people, the citizens of India should feel that the laws are actually effective, right? And it is, if a law that exists only on paper and does not protect anyone, what kind of law is that, right?
I truly agree with that. And that gap between the law and the lived reality is exactly where violence survives. People don't stay silent because they don't know their rights. They know their rights. They stay silent because using the law feels risky, exhausting, and uncertain. It is not always that it is going to be working in their favor. So, because of that,
Very
that urgency is not met. So, the real question
true.
isn't what new laws to add or what laws do we need, but how do we make the existing ones work better, earlier, and with more humanly. And why
Yeah.
I feel is like awareness is just not enough because there is something else we need to acknowledge. Over the years, awareness about around domestic and gender-based violence has increased. People talk about it more openly. Campaigns exist, social media discusses it. these are just the root level. Like, this is not going to be
Hmm.
helping. Just talking about it
Hmm.
doesn't help. Action needs to
Hmm.
take place. And still, because of, people talking about it, campaign exists, still, the people do talk about it, but still the violence continues. There is no reduction in the violence.
So
That
true.
tells us
So true.
something very important, that awareness alone does not create safety. Awareness without action can actually become dangerous. It creates the illusion that problem is being addressed while nothing changes on the ground.
Exactly, Gunjan. And knowing that violence is wrong does not automatically protect someone trapped inside it.
Hmm.
And a survive and in most of the cases, according to the data that suggests that so many a time survivors are fully aware of their rights, but they still choose to stay silent because awareness doesn't remove fear, dependence, or social pressure. It's still deeply rooted within the survivors or within the thoughts of the survivors mind, right? And
Yeah.
until awareness is backed by trust, access, and protection, it remains incomplete, right?
Yeah.
So now we now what is the next step? So I tend to propose five reforms here. So first reform that I want to make, that feel like that should be made, is early intervention. So the first reform is, it is absolutely essential because you know the system mostly reacts after violence has already escalated. So
Hmm.
what happens is ki fear is ignored, control is minimized, and threats are brushed aside as family matters. But
Yeah.
violence does not begin with bruises, right? It begins with fear, right? As we discussed priorly, that violence is something that grows over the time, right? So we need to understand that we need to first trace out the early signs like emotional abuse, restrictions, repeated threats, and we need to treat them as serious warning signals, so that we can fully able to prevent those many tragedies, right?
True. And I feel like we need to stop treating early complaints as, inconvenience and start treating them as a risk. If somebody is complaining, they think that their life is in danger, and it is really important to address it as soon as possible. Because every major case of domestic violence has a long history behind it. A history
Very.
where someone tried to speak and wasn't taken seriously. And because of that, the further steps which are needed in order to curb that risk are not taken.
Hmm. Hmm. And now, talking about the second reform, I think
Mhm.
we need to make our implementation and accountability strong. So,
Yeah.
on paper, we know that laws like Domestic Violence Act and Sexual Workplace Harassment Act, and they exist, right? They even promise protection orders, residence rights, and financial relief. But but in practice, protection often depends on where you live, who you speak to, and how responsive the system feels that day. So I feel we need to ensure that the implementation and the accountability should be made accountable and should have an impact on how these laws are governed. Because
True, I
on
agree.
if on paper, if whatever the law may be on paper, how strong the law may be, but if on practice, if it's not going to be strong, then how is it going to affect, or how its effectiveness will be realized, right?
Yeah, I feel like without implementation, accountability, the unpredictability of this breaks the trust of the people in the system and the institutions. Rights
Yes,
should
correct.
be felt as reliable and not lucky. Like, if
Hmm.
you're lucky enough, you will get the right, and if you're not lucky enough, you're not going to get your right. This is not how the
Hmm.
system works, and delay makes
Yes.
things worse. In case of violence, delay is not neutral. It is harmful.
Hmm.
What if
Very
somebody's
true.
life is in danger? And if you do not
Hmm.
act at the right time, they can, it can lead to a very grave
Cause so
situation.
much harm. Yes, very true.
Yeah. Every postponed hearing, ignored complaint, or forced compromise tells survivor that their safety is negotiable. So we need to address this delay as well.
And violence doesn't pause while the system takes time.
Yeah.
It keeps on
Hmm.
getting happening with the survivors. And it is easy for us to say, but we don't know how the survivors might feel at that moment of time. So speed is not just administrative efficiency, it is protection. It
Yeah.
ensures that the survivors or the victims are safe and they are protected, right? So
Yeah.
now, coming to the third reform that is very important to make is like making reporting safer than silence, right? So, right
Hmm.
now, silence often feels safer than reporting because many of the people think that instead of reporting, there are so many tedious process that we need to make to go to courts, and every day these like tariq pe tariq and all. So,
Yeah.
they think that it is important that they think that it is better to stay silent rather than report. So so if we want fewer crime, we need to make a balance, and we need to make sure that people instead of they feel like not reporting, they should come out of that nutshell, and they should feel like we should report, and they need to trust the system, right?
Yeah. I feel like survivors should receive protection before pressure. This sentence basically means if they are reporting to it, this is an early sign where they need to be protected. Because if they report and the institution does not take the right steps, then the abuser who has the power, they can use the pressure to silence the victim. So so that means that we have to give them immediate shelter, financial support, legal aid, and reassurance that asking for help does not automatically destroys life. It actually saves them, and protection should
Hmm.
feel supportive and not threatening for them.
So basically, we need to ensure that people should feel that they should go and report rather than feeling that
Yes.
silence will help them, right?
Yes.
So
Hmm.
now coming to the fourth reform, I think we also need to change institutional mindsets, right? Because
Yeah.
this will play a very crucial for this will play a very crucial reform, right? So
Hmm.
we see police officers, judges, and frontline workers, they are also a part of society, so they carry the same biases as we do, right?
Yeah.
And when violence is treated as a private issue, survivors feels judged instead of protected. So we need to ensure that no one is feel judged, and all of the biases that we have towards the survivors need to be cleared. So that is why this is a very crucial reform in changing how institutions think.
True, I truly agree with you. Also feel like regular training should be given to these institutions in your trauma sensitive handling situations.
Yes.
There are certain situations
Hmm.
where kids are involved, women are involved, and they're so traumatized from the incident. It is really hard for the person who is addressing to them to handle the situation and cater to the needs of the person. And I feel like gender awareness can completely change how survivors experience the system, because how the law
Hmm.
responds matters as much as what the law says, you know?
Correct, correct, correct. So now moving to the next reform, we need to make sure that there remains a gender neutrality and inclusive justice.
Mhm.
So as our constitution gives an fundamental right that equal protection of law and equality before the law, we need to make sure that survivors are not to be judged based on the genders.
Mhm.
Anyone can be a survivor or a victim of
Yeah.
this case. So we understand that women are disproportionately affected by violence, and history also explains why. But that reality cannot be ignored. And acknowledging women's suffering does not require denying male or gender diverse victimhood, right?
Yeah, fair, fair, fair. Justice is not about competition of pain, that women suffer more pain, men suffer less pain.
Yes.
This is not the definition of justice. Justice is equal for all, who needs to be protected. That person, that group is going to be protected. A system that listens to all victims becomes stronger and not weaker. This shows the
Hmm.
accountability of the system, that we are addressing you, we care about you, and that's why we are listening to and making our system stronger so that we can cater to this problem if it arises in the future at a
mm,
similar manner. And true
mm,
equality means recognizing vulnerability where it exists without stereotypes. And I feel like the role of families and society in stereotypes is very big, because we also need to talk about this
family.
area where many survivors don't go to police first. They go to
Mm,
parents, siblings, relatives,
mm,
friends, where they trust those people. But
mm,
sometimes these people are so much prevalent about society that what the society would think, they pressurize
mm,
those victims instead of helping them
mm.
out from the situation. And because of what
Very true.
society would think, they are always stuck in that situation. So I feel that too often they are told to adjust, stay silent, or think about reputation instead of asking for help.
So, as you said, I just want to add this: these responses are often considered not neutral, right? They
Mhm.
either are, they either are prejudiced or biased towards, adjusting and all. And these are the deeply rooted beliefs that we need to make sure that they also understand how men also suffer as being a uh, as being a man. I feel like,
Mhm.
yes, and they also push survivors back into harm. So
Yeah.
when society prioritizes comfort over safety, violence also gets support somewhere in between, right? And we need to make sure that change does not only come from law, right? It must
Yeah.
come from how we respond to the discomfort around us, right?
Hmm.
So now, after all these reforms, the big question we need to ask, or everyone asks, or that surrounds between us, is like, can India or any country become crime free? So now the very honest answer to this question is, I feel and no country in the world can become crime free, right?
Yeah, but I feel like that is not a failure. Like not being a crime free, that is not a failure. But I feel like if we just do not just compare it to failing, if we compare it to successing, I feel like a country would be successful if it is, able to reduce the preventable harm. If the uh,
Mm,
if the level of domestic violence is still here and if they're able to bring it till here, that is a
mm,
success. So many
yes.
lives can be saved from
Yes.
multiple reforms and everything. And I feel like countries become safer not because crimes disappear, but because warning signs are taken seriously. If it is addressed
Mm,
at an early stage, it would not lead to the most top level, the grievous state where all this happens. And reporting is trusted
mm,
and institutions respond predictably. When people trust the
mm,
system, violence loses the space to grow silently because it has not been given the space to,
yes.
expand or to, put itself out there.
And we need to ensure that there remains a responsibility beyond the law, right? So not just the governments or courts, but all of us, we need to bring it together as friends, as colleagues, as families, as future professionals and citizens of India. So what do we do when someone shares fear with us? Either we listen, or sometimes we ignore, or we dismiss, or either we sometimes validate, or do we minimize. I want to ask that, if is I want to ask, if you were there in their shoe, what do you do when someone shares fear with us? Either do you listen or dismiss, or do we validate or minimize?
I feel like whenever somebody is sharing whatever they are feeling and a situation where it is such a grave situation or a serious situation where building trust is very important. So I feel like do not have that judgment. Change doesn't
Hmm.
begin with judgment. If you have a judgment towards them, if a woman comes up to me and she says that her husband beats her, that does not give me, I should not judge her that she might have done something or her husband must have been drunk. There can be multiple causes to it. So I need to address those
Very powerful.
instead of coming to a judgment. It begins with how seriously we
Hmm.
take this discomfort. Every time we dismiss
Hmm.
abuse as adjustment, we delay justice. We talked about some myths and realities, and in the previous episode where it was said that wife beating has been justified by women itself, because it has been seen as an adjustment for so many years where it is not.
Right.
Every time we believe even every time we believe survivors, we shorten that delay. If we just lead to that adjustment, they will not get
Hmm.
they will not get the justice that has been promised to them.
Very true. So on and so forth. Concluding, I will just say that domestic and gender-based violence are not individual failures.
Mm.
They are social failures. They are institutional failures. They are psychological failures. They are because of deeply rooted beliefs. They survive where silence is rewarded and accountability is weak. And ending violence does not just only require sympathy, it requires responsibility, it requires a support, it requires that every citizen of the India take can keen part to ensure that every woman, every man, every citizen of India should feel that they are protected in this country.
And adding to that, we'll end with a reminder from B.R. Ambedkar, who was father of our Constituent Assembly, where however good a law may be, it depends entirely on how it is worked in practice. A law would not make sense if it is just there, if it is not being, in practice. Just for if we talk about this whole situation, our golden triangle, which is Article 14, 19, and 21. 14 talks about Article 14 talks about equality for law and equal protection for all. So if we talk about reservation of gender-based violence, domestic violence, there has been given equal protection to women or the abuse or the victims where they have been facing this situation. So
Mhm.
justice is not being denied to them. Safety doesn't come from having more laws. It comes from making the law work early, consistently, and humanly as in when it occurs. It does. A law will not work if it is the situation is just kept silent.
So to end with that, dignity should never be conditional, and silence should never come at the cost of survival. Thank you for listening and reflecting with us. Thank you.
Thank you.